Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week saw the biggest weekend of all time as Jurassic World opened its doors to more than $200 million. We'll also review Entourage, Kristen Wiig in Welcome to Me, Hilary Swank in You're Not You, and Nicolas Cage in Outcast. Our triple feature of older movies includes new classic The Spectacular Now, Listener's Choice Old Classic, Timely, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and the final A film in our Oscar A to Z list, and that is The Awful Truth. First up, obviously, it is Jurassic World, the biggest opening weekend of all time, $208 million. Justin, tell us about Jurassic World.
Several years after the events of the 1992 film that started it all, Jurassic World has become a full-fledged theme park with people all over setting off to visit it, overseen by Claire, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, eager to sate her audience's hunger for new and exciting attractions. However, when Claire and her scientists breed a new type of dinosaur that goes far beyond their control, she enlists the help of Velociraptor Wrangler Owen Grady, played by Chris Pratt, to hunt down the beast. The Jurassic Park franchise has always been able to be viewed as both an escapist sci-fi dinosaur thriller or as a harsh commentary on consumerism, cough cough Disney. And while Jurassic World's far from the wonders that we know and love from the original, it still uses both of those things to really put together a fun summer blockbuster. The park is absolutely gorgeous now, even though they're obviously relying far more on CGI in terms of practical animatronics and other components like that, which purists might be a little bit upset with, but personally, I feel like they're still getting the gist of the park across. However, it still feels like what they were ultimately trying to shoot for in the past. Everyone's committing to the rules, and for the most part, the dinos still hold up. The biggest issue, though, is the story, which is frankly rather flimsy. The characters are really flat, though I would argue that's kind of been an issue with the entire franchise overall. There are likable characters, but I wouldn't say they're the best developed. Even Chris Pratt's character doesn't really get much to do until Act 3, but let's be realistic here. It's the Jurassic Park franchise. We come for the dinosaurs, and by the conclusion, we get it with a vengeance. It's not perfect, but it's fun, and I'm definitely excited to see what's coming next. I leave Jurassic World with a B.
Joe, how about for you?
Wow, that's actually a little lower than I was expecting, Justin.
Interesting.
I think I had more problems with the movie, but I was a little more generous with my grade. Well, as you mentioned, Justin, I think that, purists might not really like the reliance on too much CGI. I've always kind of disliked that. I just think there's too much of it. I would say this. I felt like the movie did a good job on kind of relying on nostalgia and dropping a lot of hints to kind of make you relive the experience of going back to Jurassic Park. And I think that it paid homage to that, and it was definitely made in the spirit of the original film, which I thought worked, but I think it relied a little too heavily on that at times. I felt like it was constant, and it just kept making me thinking, I kind of wish I was watching Jurassic Park again. And I thought it sort of detracted from the actual movie itself. Now, in regards to the characters, Justin, I actually liked some of them. I agree they might not have been the best developed, but they were fairly likable for the most part. My biggest issue, though, besides the fact that they overused the CGI with the dinosaurs, is the fact that the story was really, really flimsy. Like, I know it's a cheesy blockbuster, but there were moments where, like there's one moment towards the end of the movie which is supposed to kind of encapsulate everything and be really awesome, and I just kept thinking about the person running and what she was wearing, which they actually acknowledged early. I'm like, things like that kept bothering me. Like, it just didn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, I was glad they pointed that out, though, at least.
They pointed out, which I was glad about, but the thing is they didn't fix it. And then there was that big moment. I'm like, it's this big epic moment, and I'm just thinking, well, that shouldn't be happening. I know it's supposed to be cool, and I know you should probably check your inhibitions at the door. I don't think it's as good as the original movie, but I'm not trying to compare it. I think it's a pretty fun summer blockbuster as well. Don't think too much about it. Just enjoy the action. It's not bad. I leave it with a B+.
Okay. Well, for me, I saw this not only in 3D, but in the IMAX 3D.
Oh.
And we were a bit late arrivals to the party, so we were sitting in the second row, me and my brother and my nephew. So we were really, super immersed, which was a little bit of a distraction because I had to actually keep kind of moving my head back and forth to see everything. But I think Chris Pratt is fantastic. Just in general, but also in this movie. He easily makes the movie better. Not to compare him to Sam Neill, but Sam Neill's great. But I think Chris Pratt is a little more lively, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't agree, Justin, that he really doesn't get to show us anything until, like, towards the end of the movie. I think he's pretty good throughout. I mean, his scenes with the raptors early on, when he saves that guy, that was pretty cool. So I think he does, what he needs to do. I do think the dinosaurs look great. Are they a little CGI heavy? Yes, but it's 2015. I don't think we expected anything less than that. I think the plot's okay. I agree that it's maybe a little flimsy, but for me the bigger issue was it's basically the same plot as the first movie. I mean, in the first movie they're setting up the park. Here it's an established park, but still there's two little kids involved.
Honestly, it's the same movie just on a bigger budget.
Less conspiracy.
More people to kill. Like, I mean, really,
pretty much.
I was thinking the same thing, Dan. It's literally almost exactly the same plot.
But what makes it not a reboot is the little nods
to the original
that they had to the original. Jake Johnson wearing the Jurassic Park shirt, them going in and finding the old glasses.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was cool because it was sort of acknowledging, okay, we're not trying to remake this movie, although you kind of are because it's the same
movie.
Basic plot. But
let me ask you guys about
it's a little
that.
different.
I don't want to interject with your review, Dan, but
it's fine.
I just was curious because I liked those callbacks and those Easter eggs. But didn't you guys think there was a little too much of that? Like, I felt like it was every 5 minutes there's a line, there's a scene, there's a reference.
I thought it was actually... Yeah, I thought it was, like, just enough.
I thought it was too much.
I didn't think it was overkill.
I think a couple references are enough.
Okay.
I think it sabotaged the movie a little
bit. I thought there were only really a couple of main references.
I was going to say, I mean, for maybe diehards, yes, there's probably more than a handful.
Maybe that's what affected me. Maybe I saw a lot of...
Is that an inaccurate statement, Joe?
No, it's not. I just thought there were a lot of little things, and there were some subtle things you might not pick up on, but they even look little lines here and there. I mean, they were all over the place.
I've only seen the original 3 or 4 times, I guess.
Oh, well, I saw it
probably same.
Many in the 90s. So, I did see it, when they re-released it in 3D like 3 years ago or whatever.
3 years ago, yeah.
I've seen it kind of recently. But the other thing about really all of these movies, well, not the first one, but all of the sequels and then this one is, why do they keep opening this park of murderous dinosaurs? It seems kind of silly, but then you think about it, and everybody sort of does have their own little motivation. Like B.D. Wong always great,
yeah.
Wants to be the first to the scene. He makes the claim that, if I don't sort of genetically enhance these dinosaurs, somebody else will, and they'll get the credit,
Well, to offer explanation to that, this one's supposed to be a direct sequel to the first Jurassic Park. Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 are considered non-canon in this continuity.
Which, to be fair, you could easily leave them canon because it's not like they directly say these movies didn't happen and there is no other island. They just don't talk about it.
That's true.
So, I mean, it's like...
I didn't pick up that they didn't exist. I just thought...
No, they just don't talk about it,
Well, that's fine. They're not great movies.
Explanation 2 is in Jurassic Park, the park hadn't opened yet, so...
All right, well, if you're going to beta test a park and the dinosaurs murder everyone, I don't think you open the regular park then.
That's the thing, though.
But whatever.
One of the themes of the movie is that InGen's the evil corporation. They'll do what they got to do.
And that's my point, is that I liked that. That everyone had their own motivation for keeping this park open, even though it seems kind of silly to bring all the murdering dinosaurs out, for people to look at on a remote island. B.D. Wong had the thing. The guy from Life of Pi was obviously just trying to make money and fly helicopters. So anyway, I'm with you, Joe. I give it a B+. It's nowhere near as good as the original. That is an A+. I mean, it set the standard for everything on Earth ever. But this honestly is certainly a worthy
successor.
Let's say successor, because it's. I don't know if I want to call it a reboot or what.
It's a sequel, but it's kind of a lot of things, isn't it?
It's a sequel like Mad Max Fury Road is a sequel. Yes, it's a continuation, but it's also at the same time kind of a reboot.
It's a reimagining. It injects new life into the franchise.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
What they'd say.
Yeah, I sort of don't like considering things sequels if no one from the original cast is in it.
That's actually one thing I was a little disappointed with. Like, just a little... I mean, B.D. Wong's in it.
Was he in the original Jurassic Park?
Yeah, like he was he was in the lab. That's why it was a good callback.
Oh, okay.
He showed them about the raptors.
Oh, well, that does make sense then.
So yeah, that's what
so that is
kind
another
of
callback.
interjects it. So he's a sequel. They made him a bigger part of the movie.
Okay.
Too. But
I mean, of course, you think of Goldblum. And...
That's the thing, though.
But I feel like it might have been like a cheat to have, like, the Judy Greer character, for example, be the little girl that was in Jurassic Park all grown up. You know, like, I'm glad they didn't do that.
It's cheap, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm glad they said, let's not have people from the original in it.
They're trying not to draw too much from the original movie. But at the same time, though, I was a little disappointed. Like, it would have been nice to see maybe like a video recording or some old footage, or maybe a little scene of Goldblum or Sam Neill or somebody, just like for a second.
Maybe.
For like a second. Might have been fun. I don't know.
So you thought there were too many callbacks from the original, but you would have liked to see more at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
A little confused by that.
Just making sure we're on the same page.
They were all over the place. Like, I mean, you had the goggles, you had the fence, and like, ha. I felt like
I did notice the fence.
There was
right.
like, and like, he spared no expense. Ha. You know, dressed in white, like Hammond. You know, it's just like a lot of little things. But I would have liked a cameo one more, I suppose.
Okay.
I guess B.D. Wong was enough. I mean, I was happy with him there. But I guess Goldblum's got to come back for Independence Day anyway.
Yeah,
so.
he's already got his own
So, I mean,
sequel
he's
to
already
deal
got
with.
one movie to tell them to go faster in. You know, that's kind of his thing. Let's go faster.
Well, let me ask you guys, what do you think it is about this movie that broke all the records? I mean, Avengers Age of Ultron obviously was supposed to be huge, and it was, but, you know, this went above and beyond. For a series that had long been sort of dormant here, you know, and Justin, I know you didn't have real high expectations for it at all, dollar-wise. You know, what do you think it was that caused everybody to go out in droves?
I'd argue personally nostalgia. I feel like a lot of people have grown up with Jurassic Park. I'm not entirely sure why it has as much family appeal as it does, because I know I grew up with many an individual that were traumatized because of some of the shocking scenes. But people always want to expose their kids and their families to share that experience. Because let's be honest, the first time you see Jurassic Park and them going through the entrance, and them seeing these dinosaurs and hearing what they sound like when they're stomping against the ground.
It's thrilling.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And you can't get that anywhere else. It's basically textbook popcorn movie. Why not even keep the legacy going? And I even remember after Jurassic Park 3 came out, and there were all these ideas bustling around about if there would be a 4, what would 4 be about? And I read some of the plot synopses, and they were terrible. People were still asking me, "Oh, what have you heard about Jurassic Park 4?" And despite possibly being a train wreck, people were always curious. And I think that's why that people came out in droves for this, because it had been so long and they wanted to see what came back to it. Not to mention Chris Pratt, but
Chris Pratt is huge. Yeah. Joe?
I mean, Star-Lord's hard to deny. I mean, yeah,
True.
Chris Pratt is slowly turning into like one of the biggest stars ever right now.
Yeah.
But I pretty much agree with Justin. I think it's nostalgia. I think there's always been that anticipation. I mean, Jurassic Park is one of those movies that is kind of the best example of the wonder of movie magic in the more modern age. And I mean, there is just so much awesome memories from that. And I also think that in addition to that, they did have the 3D re-release to probably test it to see how well Jurassic Park did.
True.
And of course, people love Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. People love dinosaurs. And you're right, Justin. A lot of people around our age that went to see it were traumatized by it. And I have our friend James, actually, that comes and watches the movies with us sometimes. He doesn't like Jurassic Park much for that reason.
Is that right?
He's one of those people. But even so, I think the mass majority of people did like it. I mean, I'm one of those kids. I had the T-Rex. I had the Lunchbox. Oh, yeah. I was a big fan, you know? Big fan as a kid, and, you know, great movie. So even though I wasn't really that excited for this, I'm still going to go see it. And I feel like even people that were kind of amateurly interested in Jurassic Park will go see it. It's a dinosaur movie, and you're right, Justin. Perfect example of a popcorn movie.
Okay. I do think also what helped it was the 3D and the IMAX take. It was actually 50% of the ticket sales were in 3D, which is a pretty high ratio lately.
These days.
And I think because people thought, oh, cool, the dinosaurs are going to be, you know, coming out of the screen. They weren't really, of course, but, you know, 3D was okay, I guess.
conversion strikes again.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, so it wasn't pre-rendered for that?
No, it was not. It was not. But I do believe some of it was shot in IMAX.
Well, that's
So if you
good.
saw it in IMAX, you got sort of a cooler experience.
You got your bang for your buck.
But yeah, it was a post-conversion 3D, unfortunately. Yeah, I didn't think the 3D was all that great, but whatever. All right, well, very good. We'll see what happens as the weeks progress here. Probably the biggest hit of the summer.
More than likely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, up next we've got Entourage. Joe, let's hear about that.
Entourage is a 2015 American comedy drama directed by Doug Ellen. It serves as a continuation, basically, to the HBO TV series which I don't know why. I mean, it doesn't really have that much of a fan base, does it? The plot goes thus far. Movie star Vincent Chase, together with his friends, Eric, Turtle, and Johnny, his entourage, are back. And back in business with a super agent turned studio head, Ari Gold, who I guess is everybody's favorite character.
Typically, yeah.
I don't really know why,
Not
because he's
mine.
a homophobic, racist... But on a risky project that serves as Vince's directorial debut, and hijinks ensue, including Turtle trying to get with the fighter
Ronda Rousey.
Ronda Rousey, and dramas trying to work on his career and actually become a serious actor. And Eric is just philandering and dealing with that. And that's the plot of the movie. Now, basically, in between all these various plots, and I use the term very lightly, there's a lot of cameos, most of which kind of suck, which I think was one of the pretty much the main draw to the movie, as it was with the show, is that a lot of actors and producers and directors kind of show up. And to be honest, I don't really know much about Entourage, but everything I've ever seen about the show just made me have absolutely no desire to watch it. And from what I've heard, it's basically about a fairly unlikable characters who just slowly become more unlikable as they become richer and more successful. And based upon this movie, I mean, I don't know. I thought the characters were okay, but there wasn't enough about them to really draw me in. But if Ari's the most popular one, I just hated the guy. I couldn't get behind him. The only storyline that I actually kind of cared about, I actually kind of like Turtles a little bit, but it goes nowhere, like most of the plots in the movie. And I guess I kind of felt good because Drama was kind of likable, I suppose. But I didn't really care that much for Vince or Eric at all, their storylines. And so more than half the movie I didn't care about. The other subplots don't go anywhere. And you realize there really isn't that much going on in the movie to keep you invested. And I felt like I was solving their problems as I was watching. Like, there's some really basic ways to get around your issues. And I even mentioned that to Dan in the theater. Like, couldn't they just do this? And when this kind of solved the whole problem?
Yep.
Yeah. And then the movie would have been over, half the time. So the movie did make me laugh a couple times. There were one or two decent cameos I did appreciate. And I kind of liked some of the characters a little bit, but there's just not much going on here. I leave it with a D+.
Okay. For me, Entourage is like your ex who you now hate. I used to watch Entourage. The first couple seasons were pretty funny. Mm-hmm. And Joe, even without having seen an episode, you hit the nail on the head. The reason I stopped watching around season 3 is because the more successful and famous these people got, the more unlikable their characters became. And Ari was never likable to begin with, so I had no reason to continue watching. And when I heard they were making a movie, I was like, no, God, no. This is going to be awful. I hate all these people. So it's sort of like the people you used to like who you now hate every single thing they do. But I went into it, Joe, we saw it together. I went into it knowing I wasn't really going to love it, but okay, I liked these people once. Let's see what's happening. Mm-hmm. The acting is horrible in this movie. Jeremy Piven's fine, obviously. He's a good actor. But most notably from Adrien Grenier, who is completely unbelievable as a box office draw, which is why he didn't have a career after Entourage. That's Vinny Chase.
Yeah, I kind of figured. He
awful.
Doesn't really have the...
He is such a bad actor.
Appeal.
Yeah, and he's not that good looking. Whatever. Okay, so he stinks. I think the studio knew that they had a bomb on their hands because all of the cameos pretty much were ruined in the trailer. Ed O'Neill's entire cameo, Liam Neeson's entire cameo, most of Mark Wahlberg's cameo, most of Jessica Alba's cameo, it was completely in the trailer. That's why the Kelsey Grammer one made us laugh so much.
I like the Kelsey Grammer one.
They said he was in it, but they didn't show his whole bit in the trailer.
That's a good point. The only thing about it I wanted to see was these cameos.
Right.
You're right.
And you saw most of them completely. And even the main Ronda Rousey parts they showed in the trailer.
Yeah.
Who she can't act either, but I don't really expect her to. But you're right. So many of the plots here are just horrible. And they don't resolve, or maybe some of them do. I don't even care. I did laugh a few times, mostly at Johnny Drama. He's always been my favorite character because he is kind of the lovable loser character. Mm-hmm. And that's why he's my favorite, because he never got too full of himself or anything like all the other guys. Haley Joel Osment's character was annoying,
but intentionally so.
But I think he played it well. I liked his southern accent. The patter between him and Billy Bob Thornton as his dad was fine. Overall, I also give Entourage a D+. Justin?
In the midst of all the piles and piles of TV shows that HBO has promised us film adaptations to, I just find myself asking, why this one? Seriously, there were so many other options that could have led to great movies. Entourage? Really? The one that's the most divisive? Here's the thing. The characters are every bit as repulsive as they've ever been, though my counter argument would be I don't think we're supposed to like them. If this movie is of any indicator, it strikes me that Entourage is sort of a show that's trying to heavily imply that Hollywood is this very backstabby, slimy locale where you sort of have to do horrible things and compromise yourself to get ahead. But this isn't a movie about character development. It's fan service, or whatever's left of fan service. And I guess in that regard, there is quite a bit. Cameos, big Ari Gold subplot. Where does loyalty to your friends end and studio involvement begin? Because I think that's a really big thing influencing Hollywood now, and I think it can honestly be argued both ways. But for fan service, I can justify leaving Entourage with a C-.
You're not wrong, Justin. It is an interesting commentary, but you could see that same exact thought in literally every episode of the show. The movie does nothing new with it, and I assume you didn't watch the show.
I read up a little bit on it, but other than that, that's
not
not
watching it.
No, I know.
But you're right, that the whole concept of the Entourage show is Ari Gold asking why E's in the business meeting. Ha ha ha. They did it 70 times in the show, and then they do it again in the movie. So yes, where does the loyalty to your friends from childhood, end and your career begin? They've already beat it to death in the show. It just, the whole movie is unnecessary. And I guess it is for fan service. But you're right, Justin. Why? First of all, it's years after the fact. The Sex and the City movie happened within a couple of years.
I think 4 after the series ended?
I don't even think it was that long.
Interesting.
Maybe 3?
Yeah, I mean, if this had come out maybe like 2 years after the show ended, I could justify an Entourage movie. Mm-hmm. But this long? Ridiculous.
It just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, I didn't watch the last few seasons of Entourage, so I don't know, was it left so open-ended that we needed a movie to wrap it up? I doubt it.
Probably not. I mean, from what I understand, I think it wrapped up. I just know that people gradually disliked it as the final seasons went along. Ratings went down.
Well, and that's what doesn't make sense about it. Obviously, Joe, Sopranos movie would have been the...
Well, that would have been the go-to.
Before Gandolfini's death,
honestly, if there would have been an opportunity, like a couple years after the fact, do a Sopranos movie, you should have jumped on that a while ago. It's too late.
True.
Sopranos movie, Rome movie. Deadwood. I believe Deadwood at one point was promised 4 movies.
Deadwood could...
I don't know what happened to that.
Didn't really end, and that was a big hit. So, continue that with a movie. You got the money.
I mean, even a third Sex and the City movie to just wrap things up.
Yeah, that could work.
Why Entourage?
No,
seriously.
The second Sex and the City movie was bad, though. I can't deny that.
Treat it like Spider-Man 3. Yes, it's not good, but I assume they were trying to put their best foot forward to try and wrap it up on a good note.
Well, Dan, I'm curious, not to interject some Star Trek into the conversation,
Please.
But one of the big issues with the
What a great movie.
Well, it depends on which one you're talking about, which number we're talking about here. But no, in regards to the next gen movies, one of the common criticisms was they basically just made TV episodes and called them movies. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of the feeling you got from Entourage? Like it's just basically a slightly extended episode?
I got that vibe.
Yes, I would say that's true. And that is what made the Sex and the City movie different. Mm-hmm. Because the Sex and the City movie actually wrapped up a lot of storylines from the show. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just an episode. It was a continuation of the storyline. Mm-hmm. This just didn't seem like that at all.
I think another big issue in that regard was the stakes just didn't feel that high.
Well, no, they're rich, entitled
Hollywood
but they
were really trying, weren't they?
Just to varying extents, but it was like
oh God,
this isn't that intense as you guys are making it out.
No, but I'm saying they really were trying to make it intense for the characters. Your career's over if this tanks. Take drama out of the movie. His career's over. It's like it was all about the careers and the connections and Ari stinks and whatever. So they were really trying to get us high stakes. But you're right. In the end, who cares? These are all scum characters that we don't care about. All right. Well, once again, grammar, best part of the movie.
Easily. Again.
as usually is the case. All right, up next we have Welcome to Me. This is a dark comedy in which Kristen Wiig plays Alice Klieg, an Oprah-obsessed single woman with borderline personality disorder who spends most of her benefits money on lottery tickets and ends up scoring an $86 million windfall because of it. She goes off her meds and decides to spend much of her fortune to start her own 2-hour show called Welcome to Me. Hesitant at first, the head of the studio she approaches, played by James Marsden, sees it as an opportunity to save his fledgling studio. Unlike her mentor Oprah, however, her show has no guests or themes. It's just whatever pops into Alice's mind, including bizarre cooking segments, reenactments of incidents from her childhood. Joan Cusack, Tim Robbins, and Wes Bentley co-star. Now, I'm glad we're doing this episode of Film Fanatics close to a week after I watched Welcome to Me, because this is one that I actually needed to sit with for a while. It's billed as a dark comedy, and I suppose it is in some ways, but I would say it's more appropriately called a satire. A satire of societal norms, how the public views mental illness on fame, on reality television. Viewed that way, it's certainly less dismal, because it's not really that funny of a movie. But following up the Skeleton Twins, Wiig has certainly stood out from many of her other recent SNL alum with these very nuanced performances. So any way you look at the film, Wiig's performance I thought was a real home run. Alice could have easily been like a sideshow attraction, but Wiig really gives her a great balance of emotion and empathy. The film is at its worst when it tries too hard for broad comedy, goes for the big laugh, and it's at its best when it shows us how Alice's illness affects those around her. I'll leave Welcome to Me with a B. Justin?
I think satire is a really good choice word for this one, Dan.
Thank you.
I think it's bravely tackling this commentary both on mental illness as well as, quote, reality television and just media handling in general. And while it's effective, I also agree it has some fairly noticeable setbacks. Outside of the awkward transitions between these two concepts, still has Wiig's performance permeating throughout all of it, who gives yet another knockout performance. Not quite up to par with Skeleton Twins,
No.
but definitely no slouch here in that regard. Completely committing to her character, and yet doesn't turn her character into a walking punchline, even when they are trying to make it more, I guess, comedic.
Silly.
There we go. Silly, quirky, trying to appeal to that dark comedy vibe, which I don't ever think it needed. Mm-mm. I think it really works on its own when it's being this dark satire. And I think it has a lot of things to say. I do think, however, the short running time rushes some of the character development. A lot of the side characters have little bits, and then we don't really hear from them for a while. But I do think Welcome to Me's an interesting little indie with more than a few things to say for those willing to give it a shot. I leave it with a B-.
Yeah, I definitely would have liked to see more with Tim Robbins as the psychiatrist.
I agree.
I would have liked to see more with her friend. Joe, what did you think of Welcome to Me?
Well, gee, wonder what I'm going to talk about. See, Tim Robbins should have been in the movie a lot more. I mean, no, really, I really felt like that was a really crucial component.
It was a missed opportunity.
I was like, there's so much we can explore here, and that's my biggest problem with this movie. Now, I guess you're right. Viewing it as a satire is probably the best way. I did not. I was expecting a funny movie. Mm-hmm. This movie was depressing, and I found it kind of difficult to get through. You're right. I think if it had kind of owned itself a little more dramatically and not gone for all that broad comedy, it might have worked a little better for me, because I think the performances are really strong. Mm-hmm. And I think that it does show an honest portrayal of, I think, how bad mental illness can be and how it does affect your life. But I thought that she was a very interesting character, and I felt like because it kind of gets so unraveled in the random hijinks of the show and her ideas, it kind of feels everything's really rushed and just not that funny. I actually found myself kind of getting annoyed by a lot of those transitions. I just felt like the whole thing was kind of a missed opportunity to me. But it did have really good performances, so it kind of evens out for me with the C+.
Yeah, I think it really does a disservice calling a movie like this a dark comedy, because you go into it with this certain perception. Yeah. I did as well, which is why I was glad I had a few days to kind of permeate on it, because at the end of it, I was just sort of left not feeling good, you know?
I don't think you're supposed to.
It felt kind of like mean-spirited.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, maybe that's what they were going for, but going into it with the mentality of dark comedy, I didn't get that vibe from it. And I think, if you had a couple of more scenes with Tim Robbins,
it would have balanced out.
Yeah. Or even, Joan Cusack, who I thought did a great job as per usual.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought her character could have used a little more development because she sort of goes from, hating the idea and I don't want to do this stupid show
To completely committing.
Yeah, like being one of her biggest supporters. And I would have liked to maybe see a little bit more about that too.
Bit of a quick turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the issue with her friend Linda Cardellini resolved kind of quickly. I agree, Justin, that maybe a little bit more of a 10, 15 more minutes to develop some of those plots. Not that I didn't like seeing the bits on her show and everything. We need to understand that the show is a train wreck. But maybe some of those were lingered on a little too long.
I just felt like
But give the show more substance then.
That's another option, yeah.
I thought it was just too repetitive, to be honest.
Yeah.
I felt like I was hearing the same things over and over again. Like, okay, we get it. Can we do something new now? Mm-hmm. Like, I'll be honest, I was surprised. I know it's a satire, I guess, but it didn't work. I felt like there was a lesson to be learned here, and I don't know. It felt a little underdone to me.
Well, I mean, it was trying to do the whole Truman Show thing of how real is real.
Yeah, but the Truman Show had a better structure than this, though. And
I agree. I totally agree.
Well, everything about the Truman Show is better than this.
Well, I mean, Ed Harris.
It's in my top 25 of all time.
So,
I mean, it's a great movie.
There you go.
It is.
I agree with that.
But, I mean, there are still very similar themes here of what's real, what isn't. If we see it on TV, is it actually happening? And how much people actually want to become a part of that world. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's here, but I feel like committing to that more fluidly would have made a world of difference. Watching how she sort of transforms through each episode and finding interesting ways to tie that into her actual real world, whereas in the first couple scenes of the movie, we see her just simply devoted to the television.
I actually think that's a really good word to use, fluidly, because it doesn't really it feels a bit disjointed, and everything is not quite as even out as it could have been. If we could have had certain elements fleshed out and built upon each scene and each episode a little more, could have allowed the characters more to do, more to interact, and explore those themes a little more deeply.
And I loved the opening couple of scenes, before she wins the lottery, where we do kind of see how really sad, her life is.
Hey, favorite part of the movie.
Is that right?
Before the show,
Mm-hmm.
I actually liked that. I was curious where we were going, and then she wins the lottery, and it just felt like it slowly kind of unraveled for me.
Okay. All right. Well, we have 2 home media moments for you this week. The first one is called "You're Not You," and that's going to be with Justin.
Hilary Swank plays Kate, a pianist recently diagnosed with ALS, as her marriage slowly starts falling apart. However, when she hires an aspiring rock singer named Beck, played by Emmy Rossum, the two form an honest bond that invites them both to step into new territory, move past regrets, and ultimately become the persons they want to be. Now, if this sounds a little sappy and cliched and probably going to be on the Hallmark Hall of Fame, it kind of is. And there's probably more than a handful of parallels to be drawn between You're Not You and a similar premised film, The Untouchables, from 2011 that we reviewed on the show way back when. But what keeps it alive is the talent. Swank and Rossum have a decent amount of chemistry that really shows how the two influence each other over the course of the movie and allow for some compelling humor and some really heartfelt scenes, though I feel like this really infrequently settles into melodrama more often than not, and it definitely falters. And I feel like in the same regard, the film really struggles to find its footing regarding emotional impact. There are several moments where it just should be this emotionally devastating punch to the gut as we watch Swank's character slowly deteriorate, and it just isn't until like the final moments, and I was really disappointed with that. I felt like they could have done so much more. It's not a bad film, it's just not very good, and I feel like a lot of that's due to the constant barrage of an indie soundtrack for no better reason than because indie. I leave You're Not You with a C+.
Joe?
I really like this movie, Justin.
Okay.
I guess I definitely picked up on some of the sappiness. Like, it definitely goes into some cliches. And there are some storylines, like Rossum has kind of a romance thing or something, which is kind of just there. And there are a couple little hokey moments, but for the most part, I felt the core story here was really good. I thought it did an excellent job of showing this degeneration, and I thought Swank gave an awesome performance. I mean, this is my favorite performance from her, and it includes $1 Million Baby, which I think is a little overrated.
That's brave.
Sorry. But I think she did an excellent job. It's my favorite performance from Rossum, and I can finally forgive her for Dragon Ball Evolution. So, there's...
Even Poseidon?
Even Poseidon. Yes, I could forgive her.
Day After Tomorrow? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, she was okay on that. But no, I thought that their interplay was really good. I thought the performances were strong. And I thought that that was the core of the movie, and I was really sold on that. Granted, I think it could have been fleshed out a little more. It definitely does go into the Hallmark territory. But it didn't really bother me. I felt the performances were genuine. I liked the story. I was touched. I'll leave it with an A-.
Wow. Okay. Well, for these like disease of the month type movies, a lot of moving parts need to come together. But more than anything, their success really does hang on how effective the lead is in throwing their entire person into the illness. Whether it's Julianne Moore with Alzheimer's, Matthew McConaughey with HIV, we've seen it a ton. Luckily, You're Not You does have that in consummate professional Hilary Swank. I can't say it's my favorite of her performances, but it's definitely up there. I think she knocks it out of the park, and she never goes too big with it. She makes us feel her pain both inside and out with every scene. We really get into the mind of her character. Unfortunately, what the films featuring the other diseases I mentioned have, that this one does not, is that more focused narrative that I really wanted to see. Justin, you mentioned The Untouchables. You're Not You really does attempt to recreate that like fish out of water caretaker motif of that movie, but it's a little too muddled with these unnecessary side stories and characters that we don't really care about. Chief of them, really? I would say, Joe, is the boyfriend.
Kind of throw it away.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And to some degree, even Josh Duhamel's cheating. I like that he's there. It just...
I don't know. I thought that was bold. I thought it had some good drama, personally.
It's to me, it seemed a bit unnecessary. I don't think it's enough to make the film unenjoyable, but most certainly uneven. Yeah. So I'm right between you guys. It's a B from me.
Okay.
I do think Swank and Rossum together are great.
Yeah.
I just, all of these other movies we mentioned are in that like A+ range.
Well, yeah.
I think because there's a much more focused story. Even The Sessions, is another one.
More or less, yeah.
That we've reviewed on the show. But man, is Swank good in this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The two together, they're solid. It's just everything else is kind of all over the place.
I don't really know Rossum from much. I mean, the movies you mentioned, I have no interest in and I've never seen.
Never going to watch Dragon Ball Evolution or Poseidon?
Never going to watch it.
I mean, there's her 20 minutes in Mystic River. That's about it.
I did see that maybe like a decade ago, but don't really remember. Yeah, but no, I thought she was really good in this. I don't know that she needed to be a singer. That part I didn't care about either.
Yeah.
But, well, they tried to draw the
singer
parallel with she also sang, and so they had that musical connection. You got to sing, you got to go after the guy. Well, you still can.
Yeah.
I mean,
Live your life.
I liked her roommate a lot.
Roommate was cool. Her 3 scenes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but she added some she was sort of like the one that when Rossum first shows up and she's like, I don't know if I can handle this. She's like the sounding board.
I'll be honest, guys. I should explain my grade a little more.
Sure.
Go on.
The movie was pretty much solid like a B+, but there was one little thing that bumped it up to an A-.
Go for it.
It was a certain character, a certain actor that showed up in the movie.
Oh, I got it. Ernie Hudson.
A Ghostbuster.
The man in the pool.
Yes. Yes, when his speech. Just Ernie Hudson. Ernie Hudson's like one of those guys, he automatically makes every movie a little bit better.
Okay.
So Ernie Hudson just automatically does that for me.
He did have a very good scene. I will admit that. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on. We have our second home media moment, and that is Outcast. And Joe, tell us about that.
Please do, Joe.
The latest Nicolas Cage movie.
And I'm going to tell you guys, it's funny. You guys want to know something funny? Normally, I just kind of go over the synopsis and type something up really briefly. I totally forgot to do that for Outcast. But that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter. And okay, let me give you the breakdown for Outcast, okay? Okay, you've got a medieval crusade going on. And the primary star is Hayden Christensen, who apparently killed a lot of people, which was his job. So he feels really badly about that because Nicolas Cage, who is his mentor, told him it was bad. And apparently they've had this past, which they don't really go into. It's just, Nicolas Cage is like, it's really terrible to kill people, even though we're in the Crusades. And then Hayden Christensen's like, yeah, well, I'm going to keep killing people. And then for some reason, he decides to just say, all right, fine. I'll become a good person, and then I'll go to China. And yeah, the movie takes place primarily in China, okay, years later at some point, and the emperor is killed, okay, by his one son. And so the younger son goes on the run. Does it sound like an anime? Yes, okay, it's called Morobitu. All right, yes, but done much better. Anyway,
Please continue.
Hayden Christensen, to redeem himself, I guess, is this wandering warrior who tries to help the young prince on the run as his evil brother tries to kill him, and they try to reclaim the kingdom. But it doesn't matter, because this movie is almost impossible to get through. Like, I swear I had to take so many breaks. I couldn't do this. I'll tell you what's wrong with the movie. Nobody cares. Nobody in the movie cares at all. The only person that cares is Hayden Christensen. Think about that. Now, he's doing... I will give him this. Hayden Christensen is doing the one thing that he can do, and that's be angry. He's okay at that. He's the best actor in the movie. The story is, like, very basic, okay? But everybody involved, I don't know whether it's the scriptwriter, the director, or the actors, probably all three, somehow they have this kind of spectacular story. Like, the costumes are fine. It could have been okay. But there's no life. Why did you die, Father? Why are you dying? I'm so sorry, Father. You will be a great warrior. This is not exaggerating. These are the line reads. Some of these actors are horrible. Nobody has any love or passion for their dialogue. Nobody cares. And I will leave you with this. The biggest problem with this movie is Nicolas Cage was not in it enough. Now, think about that. Nicolas Cage is bad in the movie too. But I was looking forward to it the first 2-3 minutes in because I'm like, Nicolas Cage's horrible dialogue, this is great. This is going to be a really awesomely bad, like it's going to be a great B movie that I can throw on sometime and be like, this is awesomely bad. Nicolas Cage's performance was great. Guess what? He's not really in the movie that much. This movie is easily an F. God.
All right. Well, for time purposes, I'll keep it brief. You're completely right. I mean, it's laughable how bad this movie is.
Oh man,
it's completely boring. It is horrendously acted.
Oh.
They've got horrible accents. Nick Cage's hair is like ridiculous, even for him. I mean, obviously it's an F. Justin.
Well, once again, Cage's IRS debt continues to plague his movies in the most gloriously outrageous and hilarious ways possible. Unlike last year's Left Behind, though, this movie manages to be even more awful when Cage is off-screen for long periods of time. We see him for 3 minutes, and we don't see him again until probably half.
For like 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'm like, where's Nicolas Cage?
Probably at least 2/3 of the way through the movie, making his co-star Hayden Christensen, who's almost as bad if not worse, take hold and ruins nearly everything. I'll give Cage a couple pity points because he's trying, but his line reads are so hilariously over the top.
Oh, I don't think he's trying at all in this.
No.
He's at least trying to switch up his voice, so it's not.
No, Justin.
It's not Left Behind.
You can't attack the fort.
He puts on a goofy accent and a stupid way of speaking. Yes, okay.
I didn't say it was Joe material here, but
yeah, Joe was a much better movie.
Yeah,
obviously.
jeez.
But where we'll give it a minor pity point is the action choreography is bearable, though only just. But even that can't salvage the appalling cinematography, atrocious editing.
Editing's horrible.
Yeah, editing was bad.
Abysmal writing, directing, acting. This movie is hands down the worst movie of the year thus far. It is a very easy
Wow,
F.
and you've given like a dozen movies almost an F at this point. Yeah, this is probably the worst movie of the year so far.
I can't think of anything much worse.
I mean, Paul Blart was awful, but at the very least, Kevin James was going for it.
He was trying.
He was trying to be funny. He wasn't, but nobody is trying in this thing.
It's quite possibly the most lifeless movie of the year.
It really is.
That's the biggest problem. Is like even if it were
it's
like
an
goofy,
action movie and it's lifeless.
It has no life. That's a good point. It has no life. And it's one of those things where, like, these actors, I know they're bad, but you're literally, like, thinking to yourself, there's the director right there. Oh, yeah, that's good. Well, we'll take that take. Like, I know these lines aren't that great, but I've heard similar lines delivered with more.
You can at least go for cheese.
You can go for cheese.
But see, here's how you can really tell that Nick Cage just doesn't care and is trying to just pay off his debt, is that Nick Cage, Oscar winner Nicolas Cage, okay, has enough sense that he's been in the business now for like 30 years plus, that he could say to a person, you know, these lines aren't really that good. Do you mind if I say it this way? Or do you mind if I try this instead? But he just doesn't care. He doesn't care. So why should we?
I don't
It's a
understand.
very good question, Dan, and I don't know how to answer it.
Kevin James was trying.
Well, you know,
Well, Kevin James is also writer, producer,
Yeah,
and
that's
all in
true.
between.
That's
well,
true.
That's the thing, though. You know, it's always baffling how sometimes these bad movies get made, but a lot of bad movies that get made, I think people are actually trying to make good movies. I think somebody somewhere is trying.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
And just maybe it doesn't work sometimes. You know, there's a lot of factors, obviously, but this is one of those rare instances where you can just tell nobody behind it cares, and yet somehow it gets processed through and it's out on DVD. Like, think of all the time and energy that was wasted that could go towards something else.
Because they know somebody's going to be like, oh, look, escapist action movie.
But
Maybe it might be good.
the sad thing is, though, you've got Nicolas Cage and Hayden Christensen, who, on their best or worst day, could turn in some pretty awful but awfully awesome performances, at least. And it got enough of a draw. You can tell people were like, whoa, Nick Cage and Hayden Christensen in some medieval fantasy movie? That's what people were thinking. Oh, yeah, let's go see how bad that is. And they'll be bored. Like, at least make it entertainingly bad.
This is so far away from so bad it's good territory. It's just awful.
It's horrible.
All right, well, before we move into our triple feature of the older films, just real briefly, you know, we've talked every month or so, we have a brief discussion about the new sequels coming out or the new things getting rebooted, and it seems to have really reached like a fever pitch now. We've got, and no pun intended because Pitch Perfect 3 is one of them, but Pitch Perfect 3, Maleficent 2 was just announced, The Equalizer 2 is coming out, John Wick 2, and then all of these new reboots that are coming out. The worst offender, I think, to both Joe and myself, is Kindergarten Cop. Especially because we just talked about that on last week's show, or 2 weeks ago when we reviewed Twins. Why are they remaking Kindergarten Cop? And then Sister Act, that really bothers me a lot, you know? A whoopee-less Sister Act reboot.
Well, that's the thing.
What is the point?
Blasphemy.
Get an original idea.
There's got to be some really talented writers in Hollywood turning out great scripts. Why are we not using them?
Yeah.
You know, I guess they figure let's go for something safe, and people have gotten so used to franchises now and drawing on sequels and reboots and remakes that they can just take fairly successful movies that don't need to be remade. I mean, like take Kindergarten Cop or Sister Act. What's the point of doing those movies when the biggest hook about those movies was who was in them?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, people went to see Sister Act because of Whoopi Goldberg.
That's the point.
You know? She was coming off of Ghost.
Yeah.
Arnold obviously was coming off of T2, which we're going to talk about momentarily.
Total Recall.
Total Recall, obviously. He had just had a big comedy hit in Twins a couple years earlier.
Yeah.
That's why it worked. You're absolutely right. Schwarzenegger.
Brand association.
Brand association. Well, I think, and then that's what they're banking on. These studios, let's put out Point Break, even though no one really even cares about the original Point Break.
I was going to say, the original's a freaking joke.
But that's the thing, though. If
Why?
you're going to do Point Break, once again, it's kind of most iconic because it was so goofy. And then you look at the trailer, they sucked out all the charm of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm actually glad you brought that up, Joe. One of the biggest issues that we have with these reboots is they forget everything that made these movies what they were.
like Point Break's stupid, but it's fun. That's why people remember it. You know?
And we briefly touched on this 2 weeks ago when we talked about The Rock being in Big Trouble in Little China. It was a campy movie that now they're, I think going to probably action up.
It just doesn't really need to happen.
No.
Not even remotely.
Yeah, some things are best in their time and their place, and I just feel like, with Total Recall, with RoboCop, what is with it? I mean, it's not even big franchise anymore. It's just random movies.
I know, it's bizarre. And The Craft is another one that we talked about when I brought The Craft for Old Classic
They're
a month
remaking
ago.
that, are they?
Yes, that's why
They
I brought
are.
it for Old Classic, because they're remaking it, and it's ridiculous.
God.
I mean, my argument is I would still say remakes have their place, but be more selective about them. Find really good ones that are showing their age and find new ways to convey them to a contemporary audience.
But it's The Craft came out less than 20 years ago.
Exactly.
People
That's
still
ridiculous.
remember it fondly.
No, I'm not denying the fact that it's ridiculous in that regard. I'm just saying there are examples of remakes that have managed to bring their own take on it and have gotten very good reviews from it. Dawn of the Dead, The Thing. I mean, I could go on all day, but
I don't think you could, to be honest. Most of them stink.
some of
The
them
Thing
do.
was good.
Wait. You guys like The Thing remake?
I did.
The Thing remake
The
is...
remake that you think of is not a remake.
Okay,
it is a prequel.
excuse me, it's a
The
prequel.
82 one is a remake.
It's a prequel, and yes, The Thing is an awesome remake, technically, but it's very different from the original movie.
It is, but it's still technically a remake.
Technically, The Thing People sucks. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I enjoyed it myself, but that's
It would
a
also
whole nother
bomb terribly.
topic.
A lot
Well,
of
by
people.
remake, I was referring to 82 version, but
Oh, yes. Well, that's a great remake.
Well, if you're going to go back 30 years to find a good remake, okay. Name me a good
When they
remake
were-
from the last decade. I mean, I know you hate Footloose, which I liked the Footloose remake, but I never saw the original. So how do I compare?
Yeah.
It's the same movie, I'm sure, and that's what I understand, but I liked it. Everything we've seen, Total Recall, RoboCop, they all stink.
if we want to talk 2 decades back, I'd probably say Dawn of the Dead.
In the last decade, is there a good remake?
Endless Love. Wasn't too bad.
Does Girl with the Dragon Tattoo count?
No, because that was an Americanized version of a Swedish film. That's not. I mean, it is a remake, but it's not a.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
No. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's an
Cultural
Americanization, I would say, of the book.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
No, I'll give you that one.
I honestly can't think of one.
I mean, I feel like that's sort of the shot above the bow for this. They tried to avoid doing all these remakes by trying to make Americanizations of these foreign films. Old boy, and then
You know what, Dan? I personally thought that the remake of Carrie wasn't too bad.
The
Personally.
remake of Carrie
know
was
you don't like that, Justin.
okay,
I thought
but
it was
I
alright.
have to say I didn't really like the original that much. I probably would grade them about the same. You're right. That is one example that's okay.
I thought it was all right.
But it also didn't.
Need to
It
happen.
wasn't necessary.
No.
Because they didn't really change much. Yeah, they added it for the digital age, so they were taking video of her having her period. That's about it. Everything else is pretty much the same.
Sure.
more or less, which
know,
was
The acting
bothersome.
was great in that. I'll say that.
for the most part. I mean,
Come on, Julianne Moore.
well, Julianne Moore's usually pretty great.
True. As is Chloe Grace Moretz.
Moretz.
Yeah.
This is true as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's an okay example.
It's the only one I can think of.
But it still wasn't necessary.
Still
Because they didn't
it
do anything
really-
new.
It's not like an A+ movie or anything.
No.
I mean, it's
No.
not-
But when they've tried to breathe new life into it, like Total Recall, it misses the point of the movie completely. They didn't even go to Mars, for God's sake.
I know.
So it's like, somehow a studio needs to figure out how to remake a movie
Without
well by doing something different.
Without
But-
also compromising the spirit of the original.
Yes.
True.
Because people want to be reminded of the original movie, but they don't want to watch the original movie, or else they'd watch the actual movie.
I think people do want to watch the original movie. Studios just don't, think that they do, I guess. I don't know.
But that's the whole point of doing a remake.
Yes, and that's why they all bomb.
because it's like,
More or
well,
less.
Because no one cares. All right, well, let's move on here. We've got 3 older films to discuss, one of which is our final A in the Oscar A to Z. And first up, though, is The Spectacular Now. This is a 2013 romance film starring Miles Teller as life of the party high school senior Sutter and Shailene Woodley as Amy, a girl from his school on whose lawn he passes out. The two strike up a friendship after that, and Sutter helps with Amy's paper route, and she helps him with geometry. He develops a quicker attraction to her, but he's also trying to get over his ex Cassidy, played by the wonderful Brie Larson, and he simply cannot stop drinking to numb his pain. Meanwhile, Amy debates whether to enroll in a college hours away in Philadelphia. By far, the greatest strength in The Spectacular Now, directed by James Ponsoldt, is its realism. Both Teller and Woodley portray very real people in this film. They speak, act, and relate to each other and others as real high schoolers do, in a way that we rarely get to see on film. The heartbreak, the family tension, the emotion, it all rings true. And it's not always easy to get behind Sutter as a character. At times it seems downright impossible, but as I said when we first reviewed The Spectacular Now in our one of our first episodes, I have known Sutters all through my life. He might not be all that likable, but his flaws make him a legitimate character in my eyes. It makes the movie that much more heartbreaking. The performances are great here. Great soundtrack, as you'd expect with a movie like this. On the second viewing, I actually bump up my original A- to an A. This is a fantastic movie that holds up on repeat. Joe, you did not get to review this one originally, so I'm interested to hear your take on The Spectacular Now.
I mean, honestly, just kind of remember what you guys were talking about. There really isn't much I can add. I feel like the movie does kind of go along some of the same tropes we've seen in a lot of movies like this. But I do agree there is realism and there's charm. And I always I really like the performances. I mean, I think Teller was great here. I can see why this is kind of the movie that got people started talking about him a little more. And Woodley, of course, is also great. And I think their chemistry is great. The only real issue I had, which I remember I came up in conversation a while back when you guys discussed the movie, is that whether or not he's a likable character you can get behind. At first, I didn't really think so. And I mean, that's the only real detriment to the movie for me, is that sometimes it's kind of hard to stand him. But you're right. He seems very believable. Mm-hmm. And I'm still curious to see where the story was going. It was very fluid. I just loved everybody in the movie. The performances were great. There was one of the veteran actors from The Wire was his math teacher. It was great. And
That's right.
It was kind of blew my mind a little bit, seeing him very clean cut. But another great performer there. Really, there isn't really much about the movie that I could say is particularly negative. But finding him hard to get behind for some of the movie did have some detriment to it. I leave it with an A-.
But also, once we get that scene with him and his dad, Kyle, the great Kyle Chandler, I think that really tells us a lot about his character and does make it a little bit easier to understand. Mm-hmm. You know, Justin, how about for you?
I feel like with movies nowadays, we see a lot of high school dramas, not always romantic, but high school dramas nonetheless. But what makes this one stand as one of the better ones in recent years, outside of the performances, is the stance from someone who's not entirely a social outcast. Whether or not Teller Sutter is a character deserving of sympathy or a manipulative, spoiled brat is an argument that could probably go either way depending on the person making it, but the writing keeps his character honest, realistic, and mostly compelling. I'm definitely behind you, Joe. I was always curious to see where his character was going and where his dynamic with Amy was going. And it's really solid material in that regard. I do feel like some of the other directions are a bit odd. The alcoholism never entirely gets resolved. The father subplot, we get a little bit of it. I would have loved to have seen more. And I feel like the ending is a little safe. But The Spectacular Now still works as a really honest character study about love, or even possibly lack thereof. And I stand on my original B+.
Well, I do agree that some things don't get resolved, but he's still really a kid at the end of the movie. I mean, you know, that's not something that, neither of those things you mentioned is something that resolves in a couple of months or after a conversation with his father, you know? So I feel like, no, it doesn't resolve, but nor does life. I think that that's something that the Sutter character is going to be working on for years to come, and we don't need to necessarily see that.
No, but I also feel like when we see him at the start of the film, he's writing this college acceptance college essay about these situations in his life and how they've made him who he is. And that's good, but then we don't really feel like they did get him where he claims he is.
That's because I don't think he's there yet. And that's what makes the ending not that safe. The safe ending would have been, I'm done my alcohol problem and everything's great and I love my daddy and everything's cool. That would be the John Hughes way to end the movie.
Yeah, that's true.
You know?
Which is
fine. I love John Hughes.
Which is interesting because I would argue the ending is very John Hughes in the fact that, like...
In the romance part, yes. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Romantically, it's Hughesian. For sure.
Hughesian.
Am I allowed to say that?
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Coin that. That's good. That's good.
But, you know, I think if it were a John Hughes movie, everything would be resolved and everybody would be happy, you know.
I mean, I grant you, Dan, not everything has to be wrapped up in a big bow.
Right.
But you do have to have some of your eggs in a basket by the end of it. And I feel like we have a few, but not nearly enough.
Okay. That's fair. I just feel like his character would not have any of those issues resolved. I'm glad you finally got to see it, Joe.
Well, I expected it.
Great film.
You guys kept talking about how great it was, so I was like, well, finally get to see it.
Yeah. Okay, well, up next we have our old classic listener's choice, and we had Alex on board for this one, giving us, he actually gave us the first Terminator about 6 months ago, and with Terminator Genesis coming out, he threw us Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Joe, tell us about that.
Do I really need to give the synopsis? I will anyway, because let's face it, we like it. T2 Judgment Day is a 1991 American-French, interesting, science fiction action film co-written, produced, and directed by the greatest filmmaker of all time, king of the world himself, James Cameron. The film stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, returning again, also Robert Patrick as the T-1000, and Edward Furlong as John Connor, at the young teenage version. Terminator 2 follows Sarah Connor and her 10-year-old son John, as they are now pursued by a new, more advanced Terminator, the liquid metal, shape-shifting T-1000, Robert Patrick, sent back in time to kill John and to prevent him from becoming the human leader of the Resistance. And a second, less advanced Terminator, played by Schwarzenegger, is also sent back in time, but this time to protect John. Now, this movie is often hailed as kind of one of the best sequels of all time, kind of taking the original film and just making everything bigger and kind of becoming like a staple for action just in general. This is one that I definitely watched a lot more when I was younger. I've always loved Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I think it's an excellent film. Really, it kind of... It does obviously coincide with the first movie, but it does a lot of things different. It tells a very different story and adds more onto the mythos. And in some ways, I mean, a lot of people kind of go back and forth about which one's better, which one's iconic. They kind of both have their place, but I think people go to T2 because it is so much bigger and grandiose. I think it's sort of one of the definitive examples of James Cameron's style. It definitely seems more like him once he went more mainstream. It's just bigger and louder, but fun, and it never gets boring. I love the Bob character. This particular version of the Terminator is great. I think it's actually one of Schwarzenegger's best characters, certainly his most iconic. Furlong's great, surprisingly, for a young actor. I think he has that young edge definitely to him. Linda Hamilton, I think, shows how great of an actor she was because she just utterly transforms from what she was in the first movie. It's like a completely different character. And you got Robert Patrick, who is one of the most iconic villains of all time, the T-1000. I'm not exaggerating, Dan. He's pretty.
I believe
pretty
you.
loved. I mean,
I saw the movie.
I made fun of his run like a lot of time growing up. I mean, nobody runs more intensely than the T-1000.
Not at all.
I will say this though, having watched the original film recently and then watching this one again, I didn't like it quite as much as I did all those years ago. And even though I watched it that much, so I'm actually a little more split on whether I like the first one or the second one more. So I'm going to leave this one with an A. It probably would have been an A+, but it was lacking something. So right now it's tied for the original now for me, so I'll have to make my decision later.
All right. Justin?
Well, as you mentioned, Joe, often considered one of the best sequels of all time, I still stand on the ground that the original is better largely for the more raw take. Mm-hmm. Though I do like the fact that Cameron is still sticking with what he showed us with Aliens, never offering the same experience twice, and really finding ways to change things up. Linda Hamilton's character, much more action-charged. Arnold Schwarzenegger's character going full-on action hero. And most importantly, probably the most noticeable thing about Terminator 2 is just simply the most state-of-the-art effects, which is effective, however I'd also argue is a bit gimmicky at times. It's ominous, and it certainly raises the stakes, particularly in trying to figure out how this outdated machine is going to try and take down something far more advanced. But it's still somewhat of an issue at the end of it. It doesn't quite hurt it significantly, but it does pull it down from the A+ that was the original film. I leave Terminator 2 Judgment Day with an A.
Well, this truly is obviously one of the classic examples of, the sequel. Is it better than the original? And Alien and Aliens is another one of those debates, speaking of James Cameron and that franchise. But I can finally see why here with Judgment Day. The original really is great. We discussed that on the show. I gave it an A. But T2 gives us what a perfect sequel needs to be. It carries the world over from the first film and gives us all the things that we loved about it and combines it with a stronger story, and it ups the ante of the cutting-edge visual component. Schwarzenegger here walks that line between action star and caricature, sort of at a time when he was trying to reinvent his own brand. We just talked about Total Recall, Twins, Kindergarten Cop, all these movies, and this came out right at that same time where he knew that some of his lines were going to be like these catchphrases, so he sort of hams it up a little bit for those lines, but then the rest of the movie he's like flat out action star Arnold that we saw in the first movie. I definitely think it's one of his all-time greatest performances, absolutely. I'm actually going to give Judgment Day an A+. I do think it is better than the original. The original is great, but I loved that Linda Hamilton really was showcased here as this badass action star, even more so than in the first one. I think Eddie Furlong really is a good young actor.
He was, yeah.
It's interesting because you don't see a lot of, especially action movies with kids, where the kid is literally like going through puberty and his voice is cracking pretty much every line. It makes it that much more real. That when he like screams something, his voice goes all over the place. Yeah, I think that adds authenticity to his character, which we don't really see a lot in like action movies. True. You know,
makes you wonder what he would have been if he had kept going and wasn't worried about being typecast.
Yeah, what was the problem? Because we saw him in one of our Oscar movies, American History X, which he was also very good in.
Yeah.
Well,
and that was only a few years. Well, maybe 8 years later.
7
years later.
Something like that. Stop me any time on this one, Joe. But if memory serves, from what I recall, both Furlong and Schwarzenegger were worried after T2 that they were going to get typecast as John Connor in the Terminator. So they wanted to do a third one, but both of them basically decided to walk out on it.
I believe that is correct, because that's one reason why there was a bit of a delay with Terminator 3. Kind of some resistance to doing it for that reason.
Well, and that would make sense why one of his next movies was Last Action Hero. Mm-hmm. You know, basically turning the
cheek.
Turning the cheek and sort of doing a more satirical take.
Self-parody.
Yeah.
Which is weird because most of the movies following that were still action movies.
I know. I don't understand. And also when he was governor of California, of course, he referred to himself as the Governator. So obviously he's sort of
a conflict with what he is.
Sort of going with the character, but
you're still profiting.
I'm sure at the time, yeah, he was probably a little bit worried because this was obviously a huge hit. But what's ironic to me is that, do you know how I first was introduced to Linda Hamilton?
How?
Please.
As a comedy star, because she hosted Saturday Night Live when this movie was out. Huh. And of course, I did not watch these kind of movies, but I watched Saturday Night Live. I knew she was the lady from the Terminator, but she was like doing skits and being funny. So it wasn't until years later that I saw anything else she ever did. So
her comedy chops, huh?
Yeah, she's not bad, actually. She kind of ran with it.
Yeah, she's not too funny in these, though.
No, not much with the comedy here, I would say.
Well, there's not too much to laugh about.
No. A little bit here and there.
A couple lines, you know.
It is interesting, though, because you really wonder, like, the whole movie. I don't know if you guys felt this way when you first saw it. Obviously, you know now. But how is Bob going to stop the T-1000? Because he seems quite unstoppable. And to me, I was like, well, obviously he's Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's the Terminator, he's going to stop him, but just how? It's quite the mystery.
Growing up watching it, I remembered thinking, I guess I always kind of knew Schwarzenegger's character was the hero, so I guess he would win.
Right.
But I will be honest, I really did I did know that T-1000 was so much more ominous and powerful that I wouldn't have known, honestly. Mm-hmm. I really thought... I remember thinking, watching it, that they were just going to keep running. That's all they could do is just run from this thing.
Right.
You know?
No, I'm definitely with you, Dan. The first time I saw this, I was definitely going through my mind rapidly. And I think it adds a whole new layer, particularly with how quickly they show you how twisted and dead set this new one is, which is why I like how this one sort of builds up from the first one, going back to Kyle Reese talking about, like, you cannot reason with it. You cannot do anything. It will come for you.
It's the same idea.
And it's still dead set, if not even more so.
And I think that's one of the factors that kind of turns people for the first movie. The grittiness is definitely a factor, which I think I appreciated more when we watched it recently. But I'd always liked T2 better growing up. I watched it a lot more. But one thing I hear about the first one that people seem to like more is Kyle Reese. A lot of people like the Kyle Reese character a lot.
Okay.
Which I can definitely understand.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
I will say one thing. The ending of T2 is like one of the saddest things for me.
Oh, yeah.
It's very sad.
It's one of the most tragic things for me. It's right up there with like Star Trek 2 for me.
Wow.
For the few people that haven't seen 2, I won't spoil it.
That says a lot.
You know, I remember the ending of this movie.
Darkness.
When I was a kid, this movie made me very upset at the end. I did not. I knew, of course, it has to happen, but I did not like that.
Yeah.
I didn't like it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, both great movies, certainly.
Of course.
We'll see how Genesis stacks up in about a month's time. But up next, we have The Awful Truth. This is our final A film in the Oscar A to Z. And in just a couple weeks, we're going to recap sort of all of the A movies in a mini-sode with our best and ones that were overlooked by Oscar. But this one was a 1937 film nominated for a bunch of big awards: Best Actress, Supporting Actor, Screenplay, and Best Picture. And it actually won Best Director for Leo McCarey. So Justin's going to tell us about The Awful Truth.
Cary Grant and Irene Dunne played Jerry and Lucy Warner, who after a series of suspicions decide they want a divorce. However, as their separation slowly becomes final, both try to sabotage the other's attempts to a marriage in a series of gloriously chaotic events. I've always thought that screwball comedy was sort of a thing of its time, and you don't really see it quite as much as in the past, how it came out of the Great Depression and sort of had these battle of the sexes like staples, trying to reflect on some social norms and things like that. And I don't think it's as well done today as it is in the early years. But in the case of The Awful Truth, I feel like it both helps and hurts the film. It stays true to the genre's roots in that regard, and I feel like it also allows the characters to play off each other, but often when it has something deeper to say, or at least be a little ahead of its time in terms of comedy, it tries to downplay the material so it can get some more lowbrow, goofy jokes in to keep it quirky. Fortunately, Grant and Dunn are more than worthy sparring partners in terms of fitting with the genre, adding in more than a couple clever bits for humor, even with animals at certain points, and they get more than a couple good jokes in that I would argue are extremely racy for 1937, but I really wish it had embraced its boldness rather than just sweeping it off to the side. There are some really funny moments in this movie, but it's that sort of lowbrowness that I really do think pulls it down from being something much more poignant and much more ahead of its time. I leave The Awful Truth with a B.
Joe, how did it grab you?
Honestly, it grabbed me pretty well.
Did it now?
It did. I was very surprised. I really like it when we watch these really older films from this period, from the 30s and the 40s, and we just see how risque they can be. And you know why they got nominated, because they were a little bold. They took some chances, and it's very easy to see where they poked it there. And I just found that seems to be kind of a theme going back to some of these films from this era, is like just a lot of the humor. Usually it's very sexual in nature. It's very racy. But I appreciate that. It's fun, and it kind of makes it seem a little more believable to me. Yeah, I thought the characters were likable. I thought the performances were good. The plot was decent. I mean, it didn't always hold my attention, but for the most part, the humor was pretty much on point for me. I thought it was a good time. I actually leave it with a B+.
Yeah, I think this is a fun little film, but I do have to say I'm a little surprised that it's remembered so fondly within the industry. You know, it got registered in the National Film Registry.
Interesting.
It was on AFI's 100 Laughs. To me, I mean, granted, I have a ton of gaps in my black and white romance classics, but many that I've seen are funnier than this. Some that we've even talked about on the Oscar A to Z.
Oh, yeah.
They hold up a little bit better. It does have its charms, though, including, you know, a twist on kind of a classic Shakespearean type setup. There were some good lines, I agree with that, but what keeps this above what might appear on the surface, as I learned by digging a little bit deeper, is that director McCary allowed much of the film to be improvised, and at the same time basically created this Cary Grant rom-com persona that he would be known for you know, decades to come, really. And so for me, I actually give the movie an A-, just for kind of being so ahead of its time in that regard.
A stepping stone, more or less.
Really, it was. And obviously, you know, Grant and Dunn have great chemistry together. They were, you know, playing off each other very well. But to know that much of the scenes and some of the dialogue was improvised, I think is pretty impressive.
That's a very brave call for the early years in cinema history. Particularly that knowing that this was a play for a long time before it was a movie. I'll tell you what, Dan, because of that, because I definitely would not have taken that into consideration beforehand, I jumped my grade up to a B+.
Okay. I was more along the B+ line, but then when I read that, I was like, all right, that's pretty good.
You can't argue that.
No. So, sort of like, you know, Boyhood scenario. I mean, like, Boyhood the movie gets an A- for me, but because of what it was and how groundbreaking of a thing it was, you know, I had to bump it up. Same thing here. I mean, I was very impressed to learn that.
For as effective the humor is with that improv, I mean, yeah, there's a couple lowbrow things here and there, but when it works, it's really, really good. And I can definitely see how they incorporate all that risque comedy with the improv. I think that's incredibly bold.
Well, and you don't necessarily think of a screwball type comedy as being improvised because it has to have such a comic timing to it and everything. You know, when you think of improv comedy, you think of more like Judd Apatow or Paul Feig type stuff where, you know, you're just maybe hurling insults or whatever, not sort of, you know, bantering back and forth in this sort of fashion.
There's a song and dance,
you know. Yeah, exactly. You're right. There's like a tempo to it that needs to sort of be held up. So yeah, I definitely liked it for that. But yeah, not a bad one. I do agree, Joe. I like a lot of these really old, like the 30s and 40s comedies. What was the one that we watched where they're the lawyers? I had the
Adam's Rib.
Adam's Rib, which I know I liked more than you guys, but yeah, this is sort of Adam's Ribsy in the risque department.
The back and forth interplay.
You know? Yeah, and the way that they interact with each other.
Well, I think with the classic films, I really like the battle of the sexes, because
I do as well.
There's a lot going on there with the subtext of the woman trying to assert herself and the Depression and the World War II era, and you've got the voting registry, and you can see how the history kind of interplays behind the films and reflecting that. And it seems more genuine, like it still exists now, but I don't know, it's just more charming, I think, back then. Certainly more daring.
Well, and I think it's one of the reasons that, one of my favorites, I Love Lucy, still holds up, because it is kind of that. I mean, every episode's basically the same thing. It's a battle of the sexes, between the two of them and her trying to assert herself all the time. So, and we see that in movies like this. All right, so next week is going to be a very special show on Film Fanatics. We're going to have a guest with us that we've brought on before, Peter. One of perhaps his favorite film of all time. Is Babe, and that leads off the B's in our Oscar A to Z. So he wanted to come aboard and is going to review all of the movies with us next week, new and old releases. So that will be very, very interesting. Joe, you mentioned you've got the Jurassic World review up on your site, and lots of other things popping up.
Actually, yeah, I'm probably going to do a video tonight, because it just came to my attention yesterday that Final Fantasy VII is getting a remake now. So, being such an iconic game, I'll probably be discussing that a little bit.
Oh, very cool. And then we have our YouTube channel here. Of course, you can subscribe to that. We've got the 5-word reviews on our Facebook group, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. You can check those out. And, of course, the Twitter feed at Film Fanatics Pod. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye.